Good morning. We will start up anyway because it's 10 o'clock, and I hope that we will have some who will still join us. We have had some lost, but still. We will start up with two presentations, then we have a little break, and then we continue with three more papers. So all in all, we are going to have 5 papers in the very end of our conference. And the final day will start up with a paper about the Writers' Society, Lithuanian Writers' Society in America. And the floor is yours, Žydronė Kolevinskienė. Let's try. This is the first.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And my paper is about Lithuanian Writers Association or Society, but I called it Association in America, in the United States, and from 1950. A little bit about history, about beginning Lithuanian Writers Association. The Lithuanian Writers Union, established at the Faculty of Humanities of the Vytautas Magnus University on February 21st, 1932. Formally, union exists from 1920, but as a literary section at Vytautas Magnus University. It was the first independent organization uniting Lithuanian writers, translators, literary researchers, and critics. Active in Lithuania until 1944, the organization was restored in Tübingen, Germany, on January 25-26, 1946, by Lithuanian Second World War refugee writers who fled their homeland, escaping the Second Soviet occupation, and was renamed the Lithuanian Refugee Authors Association. When the emigration from Germany began, a large number of writers chose the United States as their new home. On February 28, 1948, a Lithuanian poet, Jonas Aistis, and like-minded writers founded the Lithuanian Writers Association of North America and became its chairman. Therefore, in 1948, there were 2 Lithuanian writers' organizations, the Lithuanian Refugee Authors Association in Germany and the Lithuanian Writers Association in North America in the United States. The 2 organizations maintained friendly relations, regularly exchanging information and letters of greeting. At that time, the activities of the 2 were similar. They both continued their work and followed traditions established in the interwar period. Published organization chronicles and newsletters. Later, when conditions were favorable, association magazines, collections of the Lithuanian classic and new literary works, organized literary evening and books presentations, took care of translation from Lithuania into English, and etc. In the spring of 1950, a joint congress of the Lithuanian Refugee Authors Association and the Lithuanian Writers Association of North America was held in Boston. After deciding to merge the 2 organizations, the Lithuanian Writers Association was founded, or to precise, was restored. And after 2 years, in 2020, we will celebrate the 17th anniversary of the Lithuanian Writers Association in America, in the United States. The association began acting on the revised regulation of the Lithuanian Refugee Office Association and the pre-war Lithuanian Writers Union. First, the Lithuanian Writers Association in the United States was restored, already having certain historical and cultural heritage, which served as a starting point, creating conditions for further development of historical and literary memory and new opportunities in the future. The headquarters of the associations have changed depending on the board. However, while the headquarters, board, and presidents have constantly changed, the main goals and directions of the associations remained the same. And quote from President Leonardus Andriekos' report to the member of association. The Lithuanian Writers Association brings together people who care for fiction. Creativity is the link which helps to maintain the spiritual life of a nation and foster professional solidarity. The Lithuanian Writers Association unites authors of all literary genres, poetry, fiction, criticism, literary science, translations, and etc., living in a free world. The archives of the Lithuanian Writers Association is housed at the Lithuanian Research and Study Center at Lithuanian World Archive in Chicago. 5 big boxes contain materials over 2,000 pages total, covering the period from 1946 to 1990. One box contains the documents of the Lithuanian Refugee Office Associations from the DP camps period in Germany. Other boxes presents the activities of the Lithuanian Writers Association in the United States since 1950. The archive of the Lithuanian Writers Associations hold various documents. Organizations' annual reports, clippings from newspapers about the most important association events, information about the organization and its members, protocols, various sent and received documents, the voting protocols regarding the association's literary award, programs of literary events, ballots, members' questionnaires, list of members with their addresses, agenda of meetings and congresses, financial documents, bookkeeping books and photographs. Especially large is the epistolary legacy. Right after the restoration of the association in 1946, all organization documents were kept by its presidents. Later, they were brought to the United States along with other documents from the German refugee camps. Afterwards, the documents were transferred to Lithuanian World Archive in Chicago. The activities of the Lithuanian Writers Association, the input of the board and its members, as well as literary ups and downs, depended a lot on communicative skills, authority, and energy of the president and the board. Archive documents show that the first decade was the most fruitful in the history of the association in the United States. Very different in their temperament and leadership style, using different communication strategies with the then Soviet Lithuania and the Soviet Lithuanian Writers Union, all associations presidents pursued a common goal. A quote from President report to association members. The Lithuanian Writers Association, as much as it can, plays an active role in social sphere, which in one way or another is connected with literature and writers. The association strives to inform writers' association of other countries about our Lithuanian literature, seeks that the Lithuanian literature is adequately represented in foreign encyclopedias and libraries, looks for opportunities to preserve and publish books of its deceased members, writes letters of recommendations for their members in order to help them to secure a particular job, and annually awards the best literary work voted by a commission. There are many more areas where the Lithuanian Writers Association can make itself useful. Our main task is solidarity in creating and light itself. The end of quote. And some sentence from a Lithuanian poet and editor Kazys Bradūnas letter to association board. Seeing excellent books of Estonian poetry and prose translated into English and German, one wants to wish the board to seek people and contacts with publishing house, so we would not fall behind in this area too. End the quote. The Lithuanian Writers Association continued with a tradition started in Germany each year to award the best work of Lithuanian literature. The regulation states that the prize is awarded from the best original fiction written and published on a given year. From the very first days in the United States, the Lithuanian Writers Association Board felt the shortage of money, especially in allocating the money for its annual literature award. Being short of money, the president and the board were forced to search for other ways to get funding. One way was to appeal to the more wealthy American Lithuanians, patrons who found in successful business, or simply to ordinary educated Lithuanians. The other way was to organize campaigns, various lotteries, balls, literary clubs, and etc. From 1950 to 1964, the annual literary award for the best book in Lithuanian literature was $500. Later, the prize was increased to $1,000 and later to $2,000. During the general meeting of the Lithuanian Writers Association, which took place in Chicago on April 14, 1951, the participants expressed concern regarding the quality of the contemporary Lithuanian emigre literature and found its quality lacking and unsatisfactory in our periodical press. We applied to newspaper publishers and editors, requesting that we improved it so that poor quality literature. The participant also asked the newspaper publishers start paying royalties to writers. The role of the Lithuanian Writers Association as a molder of the revived literature is already seen during its first years of existing in the United States. The association published works of many Lithuanian classic authors, dealt with issues regarding the deceased writers' inheritance, the disposition of their remains. From the very first year in America, the association started publishing a newsletter, the Lithuanian Writers Association announcement, which kept the members up to date on its current activities and events. However, there were disagreements, disputes, debates, especially regarding literary awards. Benediktas Babrauskas' term as a president was not only productive, rich with various literary and cultural events, and stood out for its attempts to unite writers living in different cities, different states, or on different continents. His presidency was also marked by various debates and not always positive. The stance of the presidents and the Lithuanian Association Board regarding literary awards, refusal to make contacts with writers in Lithuania, and his views on the quality of literature. Its renewal and modernity prompt with the withdrawal of a large number of the association members. Some of them were expelled from the organization for publishing their works in Soviet Lithuania, and for cooperation with the then Soviet Lithuanian Writers' Union. And exclusive work of Lithuanian Writers Association is the Lithuanian Encyclopedia. The idea of a Lithuanian encyclopedia was revived in the United States by Lithuanian refugee and members of Lithuanian Writers Association. The publisher Juozas Kapočius organized the editorial team, and Professor Vaclovas Biržiška became a chief editor. Between 1933 and 1966, they published the 37 volumes of Lithuania Encyclopedia, Lietuvių Encyclopedia, often nicknamed the Boston Encyclopedia because it was published in Boston, Massachusetts, in the Lithuanian languages. It is often believed that they were continued the unfishing work of the first encyclopedia begun in their homeland, in Lithuania. The undertaking was especially difficult because most of their materials and sources were left behind in Lithuania and were now unavailable. Between 1970 and 1978, the same group of Lithuanian Writers Association members published the 6-volume Encyclopedia Lituanica, an English language encyclopedia on Lithuania and Lithuania-related topics. It remains the most comprehensive work on Lithuania in English. In 1970, a Franciscan priest, poet Leonardas Andriekus, took over the leadership of the association. One of his priorities was to pursue stronger ties based on literature with writers living in occupied Lithuania. This goal received both public and private reaction and criticism. The Lithuanian Writers Association was criticized for strengthening ties with the occupied country, or in other words, with the Soviet Union. Other members of the association, at that time it had over 100 members, were also vocal in condemning such a goal. Leonardas Andriekus took the initiative to invite young writers and critics to join the organization, even if some of them had no published books yet. His purpose was not only to revive, but also to bring together authors and literary critics of different generations with different perspectives to broaden the field of Lithuanian culture and literature in exile. In addition, Leonardas Andriekus invited former members to join the Lithuanian Writers Association who for one or another reasons left or were expelled from the organization. Because of such policy, the number of association members reached over 200. At that time, the board also formulated and published rules of copyright. Leonardas Andriekus, as president, supported the association relations with writers of other countries and writers' organizations, such as the Pen Club. Under his leadership, writer Algirdas Landsbergis, vice president of the board, was responsible for maintaining these relations. In 1975, he wrote a letter on behalf of the Lithuanian Writers Associations to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, thanking the Nobel Prize Literature on 1970 for supporting the Lithuanian nations and voicing the opinion that non-Russian nations in the Soviet Union have the right to decide their own fate. Paulius Jurkus' presidency is also very important in the history of the Lithuanian Writers Association. The start of his term coincided with perestroika in the Soviet Union and political changes taking place in Lithuania. The new board began to pay more attention to contact with writers in Lithuania and the organizations representing them. As the exhibition created by Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania on the 17th anniversary of the Lithuanian Writers Association shows, one of its first steps in this area was a letter of greeting to Romualdas Lankauskas, president of the Lithuanian Writers Union, sent on July 27, 1989, on the occasion of formally separating the Lithuanians from the Union of Writers of the Soviet Union. The board also discussed the possibility of inviting the Lithuanian delegation to the 34th Congress of the Pen Club in Canada, and later to organize a joint literary evening in New York. The meeting decided not only to send a formal invitation to the guests from Lithuania, which would facilitate their getting US visas, to arrange the literary evening, but also to give them financial support to paying their registration fees for the Congress. The literary event with the visiting writers from Lithuania was held in New York on October 15, 1989. And from the board newsletter that quarter, it was the first such gathering. The evening participant concluded that both organizations should cooperate more closely by allowing writers from Lithuania to participate in literary context in the United States and Lithuanian Americans in the press in Lithuania. The board and representative of both organizations discussed the possibility of a merge, but it was decided not to rush into it, and the merge has not taken place to this day. Significant change began taking place in the sphere of literary awards as well. In 1989, award went to poet Edita Nazaraitė, who fled to Canada and later to the United States from the then Soviet Lithuania in 1984. Another important aspect of change within the association at that time was the gender aspect. Since the establishment of the Lithuanian Writers Association in pre-war Kaunas, the organization has never been led by women. In 1998, for the first time in the history of the association, a woman took over the leadership. The new board elected Stasė Petersonienė to the post on May 30 of 1998, and she is in the center. During her term of office, poetry evenings and poetry days were organized. And for the first time in the history of Lithuanian Writers Association, in 2006, the literary awards went to Lithuania. The award went to Vincas Aurila, professor at the Vilnius Pedagogical University, now Lithuanian University of Educational Sciences, for the two-volume books, Children's and Youth Literature of the Lithuanian Exodus. President of the Lithuanian Writers Association, Stasė Petersonienė, was banned on November 30, 2016. Nowadays, the association is led by her daughter, Daiva Petersonienė. And conclusions. The Lithuanian Writers Association in the United States represents not only a traditional writers organization, but also, I think so, a memory institution of a Lithuanian diaspora. As I know, maybe I'm not true, neither Latvia or Estonia has such an umbrella organization which unites not only writers, literary critics, but also cultural, public figures and ordinary readers in exile. The International Estonian Writers Union, established in Stockholm in 1945, and which was aimed at uniting the Estonian exile writers, differed from Lithuanian organization in its size and more narrow activities. But it is important to mention that an Estonian poet and translator, Aleksis Ranit, was an active member of the Lithuanian Writers Association from the very first year in exile. Latvia also, as I know, did not have such a large scale umbrella organization of writers. The Lithuanian Writers' Union was founded only in 1940, much later than Estonian and Lithuanian organization, which were active in the interwar period. And it is important to mention that the Estonian International Writers Association merged with the Estonian Writers Union in October 2000, and the Lithuanian Writers Association, as I said, doesn't match with Lithuanian Writers Union to this day. It is political point, but it's not only political. Therefore, the activities of the Lithuanian Writers Association in the United States in 1950-99 can be called communicative memory. The archival heritage that has been gathered by the association, function of an archive, books that have been published and distributed around, function of library and bookstore and publishing house, publishing the newsletter as media function, and etc., all of that can be described as a distribution of memory. The document shows that the Lithuanian Writers Association significantly contribute not only in dissemination, but also in preservation of Lithuanian literary and cultural heritage in exile. Today, the association's role and activities in the United States are rather symbolic, but perhaps in the future, the new wave of Lithuanian immigrants will revive and continue its work, which has begun 70 years ago and more. Nowadays, the literary field in the United States is more actively filled not only by writers who left Lithuania after the restoration of independence and who write in Lithuania, but also by those who were born in America and whose primary language is English, not Lithuanian. Thus, the Lithuanian Writers Association in America has a real chance to survive, or, if matched with the Lithuanian Writers Union, work together in literary and cultural field, because it was once foreseen in the regulation of the association in the United States in 1980. Thank you for attention. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Do you hear me? Okay. So, questions and comments?
Anton Smith from Australia. Are there parallel organisations in other exile nations like Canada or Sweden or Australia?
Lithuanian organization, yes, right? No,
Yes.
no. Only in Lithuanian and in United States.
Yes,
Only.
because I know of Lithuanian writers and poets in Australia from
Yeah.
that era, but they are on their own.
Yes, Lithuanian, for example, Lithuanian poets in Australia. Australian Lithuanian poet Lidija Šimkutė is a member of both association. Thank you.
Some more questions? But I have one. Perhaps you already mentioned it, but what was the highest period in the course of the association's life when the activity was in a peak or at the highest point? Was there some decade or some period in the course of the association's activity?
The most important period is, as I said, is the first decade, is 1950, 1960, 70, because of course it's very understanding reasons, because we went to United States from Germany, from DP camps, and it's need that literary life doesn't that it will be continued. And Lithuanian encyclopedia, all regulaments, all in the first decade of a life association. And presidents were very active, very energetic, and the board was especially active team.
Thank you very much. You have question? Uh-huh.
An interesting issue is the writers who were born in USA and are writing in English. Are their works also translated into Lithuanian to be used by the public in Lithuania?
It's very good questions. I try to answer in English, correct. It is problem, and nowadays literary research, because I am literary, I am not archive historical. The books of authors who write in America and in English, they doesn't know in readers in Lithuania. It's one, and the second, that these writers are not the members of the association, no in America and no in Lithuania. Contact is minimal, too little contact between translators, between publishers. Yes, they publishing books in America, in United States, and reader is American, not Lithuanian. The first.
For the American public.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Some comments? No. Okay.
There were huge numbers of Lithuanians who came to North America during the 1920s and 30s. Did they do literature? Did they publish books on their own? In the interwar period and before?
After war period, yes, I understand.
Before the Second World War?
Oh no, it's not large number. It's not, because the active period of literary is with refugees, because after the Second War.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we are going to listen Aija Saakova, and she will talk about the path of Ivar Ivask and how he became a literary scholar.
So my name is Aija Saakova. I'm a literary scholar in Estonian Literary Museum, and it's first time for me to speak here on Baltic Heritage Network Conference. So I'm very honored. In the end of 2017 and in the beginning of 2018, Estonia and Latvia both celebrated the 19th birth year of Estonian-Latvian poet and literary scholar Ivar Ivask. So here you see the both celebrations. In Tartu there was a symposium dedicated to Ivar Ivask, and also an exhibition, and the same in Latvia. So let me tell very briefly some words about Ivar Ivask. He was born and raised in Riga by a Latvian mother and an Estonian father, and their home language was German. So he emigrated with his family to Germany in 1944. In Wiesbaden, Ivar Ivask graduated from Estonian high school. From 46 to 49, he studied German and comparative literature and art history at Marburg University. In 1950, he defended his master thesis with a work on Gottfried Benn as a poet. And he continued his studies in German literature later in Minnesota University in Minneapolis in the United States since 1950. And he defended his doctoral thesis on Austrian writer Hugo von Hofmannsthal in 1953 in the United States. So Ivar Ivask never lived in Estonia. Only he spent his summers in South Estonia in Rõngu, where his father's family was coming from. And he lived in Europe, like maybe for 1 year. He and his wife Astrida Ivask moved to Ireland in 1991, and Ivask died already in 92. So he lived and worked most of his life in exile in the United States. And after a military service as a nurse, he worked in St. Olaf's College in Northfield, 56 to 67. And starting from 67, he worked in Oklahoma, where he finally accepted a position as editor-in-chief of literary quarterly magazine Books Abroad. This journal was later called World Literature Today. So, and Ivar Ivask was an editor-in-chief of this magazine from 67 to 91. So parallel to the work with the magazine, he also worked as a professor of modern languages and literature in the University of Oklahoma. He founded a literary prize called Neustadt International Prize of Literature. It's also called as a small Nobel Prize or American Nobel Prize, and several laureates of this prize were also given a Nobel Prize later, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Czesław Milosz, or Octavio Paz. But Ivask also was a founder of a conference series dedicated to writers of the French-speaking and Hispanic world, Butterbro conferences. After the death of Ivar Ivask's wife, Astrid Ivask, Latvian poet, she died in 2015. Ivask's archive was given to Estonian Cultural History Archives at the Estonian Literary Museum, so where I work. It is mostly manuscripts. Here you see a page from Ivask's diary. So we have Ivask's diaries. He kept diaries since 64 and to the end of his life. There are altogether 56 volumes of diaries, all in Estonian. And also Ivask's correspondences. It is known that he had over 500 correspondences with different writers, scholars all over the world. So, like names like Boris Pasternak, Heimito von Toder, Jorge Guillen, or Hendrik Radauskas, or Estonian authors Ants Oras, Maria Under, Bernard Gang, are just some examples of his correspondences. The library of Astrida and Ivar Ivask is kept in Riga at the Academic Library of Latvian University. And there is also to reading rooms at the Latvian academic library dedicated to Ivasks, both of them. One could say that Ivar Ivask was most certainly an exceptional man in Baltic diaspora. Together with his wife Astride, he built many bridges between different Baltic cultures, between different poets and writers from different cultures and generations, but also between writers from behind the Iron Curtain and free world. The question that puzzles me since I met with Ivar Ivask's writings and that I would like to look into today is what it is or what it takes to become Ivar Ivask. In other words, what it is what helped him to become this exceptional person who created literary world for years and who mediated between cultures. It also puzzles me what it is that kept Ivar Ivask identifying himself as Estonian and finding his way to writing poetry in Estonian. Moreover, what motivated him to deal with Estonian literature from scholarly perspective? Already parallel to his studies in German literature in Marburg and in the United States, he wrote his first article on Estonian literary criticism. In 1951, he published an article in Tulimuld about the role of Estonian literary criticism in diaspora. And later, his first review on Estonian literature was published 1954 on Bernard Kangro's novel Peipsi. Since he chose the language of his diaries to be Estonian, there is no doubt that he did identify himself, first of all, as Estonian. And it's also known that the common language between him and Astride was in the early years German, but later it became to be Estonian. But he never. It is clear that he identified himself as Estonian, or we could say also someone from Baltic countries, because this nation of Baltic countries was very important for both of them. But he never positions himself only within Estonian or Estonian diaspora community. This, as well as the fact that he communicated not only with diaspora Estonians, but also with Estonian writers at home in the Soviet Estonia, caused also some tensions between him and other diaspora Estonian writers. So in order to understand how he became who he was, I believe it is of great importance to understand that he was, first of all, a poet before becoming a literary critic and a scholar. In his self-written short biography, he describes how he discovered Rilke in his father's library and how he wrote his first poems at the age of 15 in German. His love towards poetry, firstly to German poetry, made him to become also later a critic and a scholar. So during his studies in Marburg, he was strongly influenced by his German Jewish professor of German literature, Werner Milch, who introduced Ivask to the principles of comparative literature studies and literary criticism. In his diaries, Ivask writes about Werner Milch that he had a respectful but also to some extent skeptical view to German literary thought, and that this felt fresh and inspiring to Ivask. Milch oli kosmopoliitse avaruse ja sümpaatiaga sakslane, kelles aga voolas ka juudi verd. Ta suhtus lugupidamise, kuid ühtlasi ka kriitilise skepsisega Saksa mõttemaailma. See mõjus uudselt, värskendavalt, sest oli Milchi Inglismaal veedetud pagulasaastate rikastuseks. It is noteworthy that Ivask's doctoral thesis, written already in the United States, depict the famous Austrian fin de siècle author Hugo von Hofmannsthal as a literary critic, whereas he was first of all known as a writer and a playwright. Taking a look into the manuscripts of Eva's doctoral thesis, 462 pages total, one could argue that Ivask was interested in Hofmannsthal's self-awareness as a writer and as a critic, in his methodology of writing. In this work, Ivask systematizes Hofmannsthal's thought on different areas of German and Austrian literature, die kritische Leistung Hofmannsthal's, and formulates his principles of his literary criticism, die methodischen Grundlagen von Hofmannsthal's Literaturkritik. Ivask underlines two major ideas within the literary critics of Hofmannsthal: the idea of Europe and the idea of European literature within world literature, and the idea of a poet critic. For Hofmannsthal, European literature is one organic sphere, and Ivask argues that his literary critics is also European. Hofmannsthal's Kritik ist europäisch ausgerichtet. Furthermore, Ivask claims with Hofmannsthal that the idea of Europe can be encountered foremost in European literature. Die geistige Idee Europa manifestiert sich am schönsten in den europäischen Literaturen. Hier wird wahrhaftig Europa als einheitliches Zivilisationsgebiet sichtbar. Man kann sagen, dass Hofmannsthal's Idee Europas nicht die eines abgeschlossenen Kulturkreises, sondern eines der übrigen weltgeöffneten Kulturkreises war. So both ideas, the idea of an European literature and the concept of a poet critic, become or are relevant also for Ivask himself. I already mentioned that he wrote parallel to his studies on Hofmannsthal. He wrote and published an article about the role and tasks of Estonian literary criticism, mõtteid Eesti kirjanduskriitika ülesannetest. And this is in many ways a programmatic text. He starts with a quote or motto from René Vellek. The study of comparative literature in this sense will make high demands on linguistic proficiencies of our scholars. It asks for a widening of perspectives, a suppression of local and provincial sentiments, not easy to achieve. Yet literature is one, as art and humanity are one, and in this conception lies the future of historical literary studies. Ivask argues with Vellek that small nation literature cannot be considered separately. They need to be seen in a bigger European context. At the same time, he also states that the first and most important role in diaspora is to preserve the nation. Estonians should be proud of their talented and work-ranked novelists and poets. And he names, from poets, he names Juhan Liiv, Gustav Suits, Maria Under, Betty Alver, Uku Masing, Bernard Kangro, and from novelists he names Eduard Vilde, Anton Hansen Tammsaare, Friedebert Douglas, August Kailit, Karl Ristikivi. But at the same time, there is no point analyzing and seeing those authors only within Estonian context. The role of a scholarly critic is to put such authors into a comparative perspective in order to open up a full spectrum of possibilities of those authors. Vajame rohkem ulatuslikke kriitilisi esseid meie kirjanduse parimate autorite ja põhiprobleemide üle. Vajame biograafiaid. Mitte üksnes head tõlked, vaid samaaegselt meie kirjandust tõlgendavad, liigitlevad, teiste kirjandustega võrdlevad kriitilised kirjutised aitavad saavutada meie kirjandusele euroopaliku nime. Ivask elaborates on the difference of literary critics and literary history studies. Whereas literary history studies concentrate on the past, critics need to show the position and role of a text in a contemporary situation. The scholarly critics need to widen this perspective and show also the comparative view, the position of an author or of a text within bigger frameworks. For Ivask, the framework is foremost European. He clearly states that despite the fact that Estonian literature is despite the fact that Estonian literature has a very short history of its own, we need to see it within West European cultural context, which is more than 3,000 years old. Such approach and understanding of European literature obviously demands very high and broad philological skills, as Ivask states with Welek's words. Simply put, one needs to know languages. And Ivask does. He's able to read and write about Estonian, Latvian, to some extent Lithuanian, Russian, Finnish, German, Spanish, French, Italian, Greece, and maybe some other languages that I could not mention now. The other idea that Ivask formulates in his doctoral thesis about Hofmannsthal concerns the role of the critic. Ivask clearly sees the work of a critic as extremely important. Beside the ability to feel at home in several national literature and to be able to read several languages, Ivask also values the poetic role of a critic. Thus, he speaks of a poetic critic, Dichterkritiker, and about criticism as a poetic science, dichterische Wissenschaft. Hofmannsthal ist ein Wendepunkt in der Geschichte der deutschen Kritik überhaupt. Hofmannsthal ist damit vielleicht der erste Poet-Kritik von Rang in der modernen europäischen Literatur. Denn Hofmannsthals Kritik war eine dichterische Wissenschaft, eine Kunst für sich wie alle Literaturkritik, die sich nicht die Freiheit der höheren Zusammenschau der literarischen Phänomene nehmen lassen und die zugleich nicht diese Freiheit einer pedantischen Silben- und Adjektivzählung opfern will. So in order to come back to my question, what it takes to become Ivar Ivask. Of course, it needs talent and hard systematic work, but it also needs clear principles and good role models and dialogue partners. It needs the courage to learn from the best. So Ivar was not afraid to make contact and meet up and step into dialogue with the best writers at his time. And although Ivask's statements were not always understood and shared, his contacts with writers in Soviet countries were not approved in Estonian diaspora. He has given an immense contribution not only into mediating Estonian literature into the English-speaking world, but he has also built several bridges between small literatures and between diaspora and the literatures back home. I believe that Ivar Ivask's ideas on the role of literary criticism are also relevant today. His call to philological skills and reading national literatures in original needs to be also reminded today. So, thank you.
Thank you. So, time for questions, or some remarks, or some additions. We have some literary persons here as well, so not only diaspora historians. Okay, then we will leave the questions to the coffee break. But thank you, Aija Saakova.